702.
Weird and wonderful.
14 minutes after 9 o'clock. Smuda the Monk, Savya Sachidas Prabhu is my guest. He's in Australia right now. It's 6 o'clock, I'm told there. Smuda, good evening to you, my brother. Are you well?
I'm well, Aubrey. I'm well.
Hey, man, it's 6 o'clock there.
Yeah, kusile.
You know, that whole thing about time and how we can be in one time, what do you call these things? Well, right now we are in 9:15 in the evening, right? You are there, you are 6 o'clock in the morning. What do they call that thing, man? Time
zones.
Time zones. That's what I was looking for. It's a fascinating conversation. Somebody needs to talk to us about it one day, just so that we can talk about. Tell me, what is the anxiety epidemic, Buddha?
Oh, it is the state of affairs of this world we live in. Yeah. Actually, it's intrinsic to the substance of life in the mature world, you could say, in that we are always uncertain and we can't account for all these ups and downs that come. And when we look to the future, it's unclear what will happen. And we are also stuck in a past that wasn't pleasant. So we're always anxious. And at the deepest level is that the very vehicle with which we're experiencing life is up for expiry at any time. So we never know when we're going to lose the body we live in. So that is one intrinsic level of anxiety. And then there are, social factors, political factors that create uncertainty in our life, financial, different turbulences are there. Therefore, the mind is always spiraling with anxiety levels.
So it's really the reality of uncertainty that we are talking about here, the uncertainty of mortality, the uncertainty of practicality, and I suppose the uncertainty of just the next minute is what you would describe as the anxiety epidemic?
I would say yes. And I think the times that we're in are fueling it even more. In the past, it's always been the condition of the world that things are not as certain. But now the world we live in is that instead of knowing our own immediate situation, we are struggling with comparing ourselves with others. And we are also valuing the individual based on what they can show externally. And so starting from young, people are aware of certain markers of success. And so even the children are talking about how they're stressed out. They are sitting in South Africa and having desires of things happening in Germany, in the US, no more just down the street. So because of the heightened sense of want and lifestyle pressures, then everywhere, from the young to the old, are struggling with this anxiety. And I would also say, Aubrey, that, and we'll discuss maybe, what is the cause of this? It is also has to do with the worldview that we possess.
Yeah. Has there ever been a time in the history of mankind, a time when there was no anxiety epidemic?
Yes, it is. Well, the majority of the population in the past were not really harassed as much. Why I say this is because when the culture focuses on cultivating what we would call in Gita wisdom the mode of goodness, where one is understanding themselves as the spiritual being, they see the world differently from one who's being affected by the mode of passion, where they are looking at the world based on their greed and desires and wants. And also another worldview is when people are influenced by what is known as the mode of ignorance, where it's a lot of fantasy and just wishing on a star, not really actively participating, and influenced by a lot of intoxication in life. So we are currently at a time where passion and ignorance are dominant. So more and more people are affected by that. But when the culture is cultivating the inner man, then people are very clear about the nature of this world. They understand temporary things come and go, and they don't hinge their whole identity on what is happening on the surface, but are much more fulfilled internally.
Would somebody who says, sure, the epidemic of anxiety in times past might not necessarily have been as a result of inter and intra-human causes, but the very issue of having to survive on a day-to-day basis, of having to avoid being the next meal of some predator, of finding adequate accommodation in the face of certain elements, whether it's the cold or the heat or whatever the case may be, the lack of technologies that make life so easy these days that we don't even, what's the right word? We take those kinds of creature comforts very for granted. That reality at a certain point in time could have also been a reason for, shall we call it, an epidemic of anxiety at that time? Maybe not the same reasons, but that the anxiety epidemic has always been around, and that's the lot of man.
Yes, like I was saying that it is intrinsic to the hotel called this material universe we live in, that there must be some anxiety, because it's the, you could say, unnatural position of the eternal soul. But then when the people are sufficiently educated in living a life based on understanding the laws of the universe, the laws of the Supreme, they are better equipped. And also the type of life they lived was, the man worked just outside his own house. He cultivated his land. He had his cows, and he was living amongst family. Mm. And so there's so many factors which give support to his anxiety of maintaining life. Because there he can see his crops are growing. He can see where he'll get his milk. And if he needs to eat flesh, God forbid, there are his cows and goats. There's a river. So the basic necessities of maintaining life were tied to nature and tied to the Supreme. And so there's a sense of security there. Mm. But now that everything depends on finance mainly, man is much more in survival mode, because without the paper to go and purchase, you practically become a non-entity, and there's not so much support structure. So in these ways, you could say materialism strips life of meaning and purpose, because it makes man feel that without his own endeavor, he's in no man's land. So it's conflated in the times that we're in.
Let's talk about that issue of the worldview that you touched on a little bit, to say that perhaps we need to look at how we see the world, how we understand the world that has created the kinds of anxieties that we face.
Yes, I would say look at it, and so there's either materialism or a spiritual based or metaphysical based worldview. When it comes to materialism, two brands of it. There's one which is like fanatical. It claims that matter is all that exists. And another type is functional. It claims that matter is all that matters. There's more of the functional materialists than there are the fanatical. Because the fanatical ones, they reject this time-honored warning that materialism will take away purpose and fulfillment in life. They'll neglect social findings that inevitably materialism will bring immorality. And for them, the only thing is that no matter what cost, let's enjoy. We don't care about the consequences. Whereas the functional, they're busy with life, and so they may believe in a metaphysical reality, spiritual reality, but they're just enamored by the material pleasures of life, and they postpone this conversation.
Is it because there is a practicality, an immediate practicality to materialism that satiates a particular type of search of meaning? Could that be the reason?
Yes, one of those reasons is that there's pressing practicalities, as you say, which sort of blind one to an alternative of living. Then you just sort of, as we say, the rat race. Bob said it well. Oh, what a disgrace to see the human race in a rat race. So we're chasing, and we're never really getting that inner fulfillment that is insatiable by material means, because it is the inner man is a spiritual man.
What is the other worldview that we find ourselves immersed in sometimes, other than materialism and suppose the hedonism that follows it?
Yeah, it is simply that. There's varieties of it. It could be sometimes persons are searching for the economics of it. And with the economics, they can enjoy different types of pleasures, which prove themselves to be temporary and not so fulfilling. And when that doesn't work, then they may look towards religiosity. But that religiosity is also based on trying to fulfill material desires. So then we approach divinity and sitting, or my dear Lord, I need a job, or my health is not so well. My kids need this and that. So we look for perishable things because they are pressing. So this is good. It's a bit of an advancement. But then higher someone goes into that religious, spiritual space looking for knowledge to understand what are the causes of the realities that I experience. And are there ways and means that I could perhaps raise my consciousness above being too susceptible and sort of oppressed by the conditions I live in? So you could say materialism has those varieties, and as one hits themselves against the laws of nature, when they start to bleed, then they ask serious questions about how can I actually be extricated from these conditions.
What about the search for meaning? This often heightened conversation about actually we are here to find meaning. What does that mean? And to what extent does that contribute to the issue of the anxiety epidemic?
Yeah, it is a big factor, because without finding the best in ourselves, discovering the best in ourselves, we can't offer the best of ourselves. So it is like you have some inheritance that's buried in the backyard, and you just know that it exists. Some inheritance is buried somewhere, but you don't know exactly where. So naturally you'd want to locate it and reap the benefits of it. So this meaning and purpose is like a mobile phone that's never used to make phone calls, but is used to scratch around, so it never hits its potential. So potential is that we have a spiritual reality to experience, but we are only experiencing an idea of it. We don't really purchase it. I would say a good example is this. You have a jar of honey, and you can only lick the outside of the bottle. So unless you know that I need to open this jar and dip my fingers in it and taste the honey, you just have a sense that there's honey to be enjoyed, but you just cannot enjoy it. So meaning or purpose means connecting with that spiritual identity and connecting with the experience of it.
Give us a call. Are you in a state of constant anxiety? Are you in a state of constant fear, worried about something? And sometimes, even though there aren't any perceivable things to worry about, you're worried. You get worried when you're not worried. You're in a situation where you are most comfortable if there is some sort of crisis going on in your life, because at least you have the fact that you know exactly what you're uncomfortable about and worried about. But when there's nothing to worry about, you are worried that, man, I'm not worried. Give me a call. I'd love to hear from you. And why do you think you're in that space? Yeah. Has it got to do with the way that you understand the world? Are you, as my guest seems to be suggesting, perhaps that you have a fundamentally materialistic worldview without really understanding it? That perhaps even your religiosity, your religion, is a spiritual expression of a fundamentally material way of seeing the world? Oh, that is something. Hey?
Yeah.
That sometimes we get ourselves into this idea that we are spiritual when we're just religious. And by the way, I get the fact that, religion is an expression of spirituality, but I suppose it's the amount of each variable in that jar that determines the level of spirituality. And let me ask this question, Sbuda. Why do we need to be spiritual, man? Hey, it sounds like such a schlep. Oh, dude, I mean, Why do we need to be spiritual and deep and so in contact with the greater spiritual me? Why don't we just, why don't we just
live?
Just live, dude. Do you, boo?
Yes, and it's a concern for people because we've become disconnected like that. So it's work to reorient. But we cannot run from what we are. Just like, water is by default is liquid, but under different environments, you could freeze it and make it solid. You could boil the water and make it steam. But if you let it be, it goes back to its default nature. So the nature of life, the living principle, is anti-material. It is spiritual. And so its nourishment is of the same nature. So
is materials, Buddha, is the material anti-spiritual? In other words, I'm not sure whether...
That's a deep question. It's a good one.
I'm not sure if I totally agree with the idea that all material things are anti-spiritual. I tend to be drawn to the idea that even material things are an expression of the spiritual, but an expression.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
Is this idea that if something is material, therefore it is anti-spiritual, is that a consistent way to rationalize the meaning of life?
No. Actually, as you have expressed it, what we're experiencing is a pointer to its divine source. So it is all the energy of the Supreme Being. And it becomes material when it is viewed outside the source, when it is divorced from its origin. So spiritual life or consciousness means to see all energy, all matter, all phenomena as the energy of the Supreme Person. So Krishna says like this in the Gita, that one who sees me everywhere and who sees everything in me, I am never lost to him and he's never lost to me. So it's not just that it's a separate thing. That is the disease. But when we see it like that, that's when it creates suffering.
Yeah.
But if we see, I'm the light of the sun and the moon, I'm the ability in man, I'm the intelligence of the intelligent. In Gita, Krishna even says that I'm the gambling of cheats. So if we see what we call material phenomena, and we see it all the way back to its source, then it is always giving us a spiritual awareness of life.
So is that perhaps, as we've already touched in our conversation about worldviews, being contributory to the issue of the anxiety epidemic? Could it be that part of the anxiety epidemic is caused by this irrational, unbalanced search for spirituality that does not acknowledge that even the mundane, the non-spiritual is spiritual. Even the material is spiritual. Could the fact be that the anxiety epidemic, the fear, the constant questioning of whether or not I'm going to land on terra firma the next time I'm conscious, is perhaps as a result of this idea that we're either spiritual or we're materialistic? Could it be that the reality is that all is spiritual, even the material, and that is the right worldview to have?
Yes. If we're not properly oriented, then it brings about unnecessary fears because it's an all or nothing situation.
Yeah.
And that's too much to ask of anyone. We can't just be fully spiritual because there are factors here that need to be taken care of, like we said, all the life's practicalities. But the whole science of it is to be able to imbue your environment with the divine reality, understanding how to utilize things in proper consciousness. So then what we do is that we, for lack of a better word, spiritualize our lives because of understanding what we're dealing with. Then, the mundane is no longer just the plane of egocentricity, but the mundane becomes the plane where divine service can play out.
What are you worried about? Give us a call, 011-883-0702. Do you understand the nature of your anxiety? Yeah, I know that maybe you're worried about where you're going to get the money to make your rental payment. Sure. But there seems to be a reality at the moment that goes beyond just the cause and effect relationship that causes anxiety. There seems to be an undercurrent of anxiety that exists in the world today that goes beyond that. And I'm first of all wondering whether you're aware of it. Do you perceive it? Have you taken time to ask yourself why it's happening, why it's there? And what are you doing about it? To what extent do your worldviews, the way that you see and understand the world, to what extent does it contribute to that? Yeah? Many of us, Buddha, come from a worldview that is very apocalyptic. There's always an end time narrative in the way that we have been raised, that at some point the world is going to end. And at every point in the continuum of the evolution of man, there seems always to have been a similar sort of narrative that speaks to the end of all things. Armageddon, Ragnar, whatever, I think that's what the Nordic people refer to it as.
Ragnarok.
There you go. And many different cultures have different ideas of this idea. And especially when we are not paying the rent because the job is not there anymore. The relationships in the home aren't as sweet. It seems to evoke all manner of thought around the possibility of an end of days, an Armageddon. Could it be that we have imbibed that kind of narrative for such a long time as humanity that perhaps we're expecting it and therefore manifest it, and that's probably why we have this epidemic of anxiety?
Yes, we could attribute some of this anxiety on that. But we can also look at, the end, or that things are temporary, is really to inspire us, to impel us to raise our consciousness to the spiritual level. Because if we remain in material consciousness, then it is a dual thing, beginning, end, friend, enemy. And as we observe nature, things come into being, they stay for some time, and then they vanish. And so that threat is constant because we observe it. But when we raise our consciousness to the spiritual level, we understand that we are indestructible souls, that we can relish love, eternal, and we can be in contact with the all-attractive person. And we learn about the eternal environment. And therefore, we are not just motivated by survival, but we live in the mood of what is the value to serve? Why should I be alive? To connect, to serve, to inspire, to encourage. But if it's just about will I survive, then the environment always tells us no. At the material level, the body will have to go and everything connected to it will disappear from our vision. So there is that anxiety when we don't have a clue how to rise above it. And it can be it's like a nagging feeling at the back of the mind. And so sometimes people are then pushed to a position where maybe let me just end it now. It's frustrating. Anyway, death will come anyway. So why go through this movie where I don't see the point?
Chimbuzi says, Aubrey, we're overstimulated these days. Too much info. Remember, ignorance is bliss. He continues to say, I think we are over-intellectualizing this. It's all about addiction to dopamine. Materialism gives us a quick and easy dose. Even heroin ultimately pumps dopamine. Dopamine is addictive, says Chimbuzi. Maybe you might help me with that chemistry lesson. I have no idea what's going on there. But Sam Trong hits a very interesting note. He says, living too much in the past causes depression. Living too much in the future causes anxiety. Both have the commonality of the person identifying too much with who they think they should be, right? Instead of identifying with who they are now, the issue of presence. And then Nolutando says, I find myself in a constant anxiety and worried state, mostly due to the levels of crime in South Africa. We are spiritual beings who hail from a creator who is a spiritual being. We cannot but be spiritual. We, however, live in the flesh, hence we need material things, says Nolutando. My sense is that even if there wasn't crime, even if there was greater certainty about being able to get those material things for which our body craves, our material bodies crave, I've got a feeling that the kind of anxiety epidemic that we're talking about here, Sbuda, goes beyond that. That it is about deeper issues than whether or not somebody is going to break into my house and commit crimes, and whether or not I've got a feel. Talk to me about that. By the way, please give us a call, man. I don't want to hoard Sbuda on this conversation. Yeah.
Just the other day, because I'm in Australia now, and I was just getting some stats regarding Australia and New Zealand. New Zealand especially, beautiful place, just beautiful. Wherever you go, South Island, so beautiful. But the suicide rates are like the highest in the modern world, so New Zealand, Japan, Australia. So crime is like not really a thing. They don't really lock their doors. Nobody's worried that they'll take my iPhone because everyone has one. But then they're confronted with what we discussed earlier, meaning and purpose. What's this whole thing about? It's all beautiful. The government gives me money. I don't have to worry about material life, but then still anxious without connecting. So that point, we're spiritual beings that the caller or guest sent in without addressing that issue of connecting to our original environment. We cannot be free from the anxieties of the mind.
So it isn't necessarily an anxiety that comes as a reaction to the material conditions. It is an anxiety that comes as a result to a non-connectedness to purpose, to meaning. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, at the bottom level, that is the baseline anxiety. then the environmental causes are also then become a bigger factor because of really not being plugged in, connected. So one who is connected like that spiritually then can handle the environmental pressures in a much more balanced way. Yeah. They don't become overwhelmed. Yes.
Sharon says, before enlightenment, chop wood and carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood and carry water. What do you understand by that?
Just trying to process that. Keep it simple, you know. There's basic things. Keeping body and soul together doesn't take this whole gigantic endeavor that we've made life to be. Simple living, high thinking, I would say. But these days is complicated living, no thinking.
Yeah. Why is this conversation important, Sbuda?
It's important because it never goes away. You know, it's like if we're pretending we're something we're not. That pretense will never fulfill me because it's all an act. So until I know who I am and I act for my welfare, that is, act as a spiritual being who's going through a material experience, then it all just becomes repetition, that we enter into the grander time scale, which means that soul again has to take another body to ultimately learn that lesson and transcend this world of duality. So we're just acting in ways that is creating further bodies or further complications with the material nature.
I want to take some calls.
So it is.
Yeah. Somebody said to me before I take the call, somebody said to me once that the eternal soul is an amazing accountant. It knows what you are supposed to achieve in order for you to find meaning. And it doesn't matter what it is that you preoccupy yourself. You know at a very deep level that you haven't ticked the boxes that provide your soul with meaning. Matqubela is in Tembisa. Good evening to you, Matqubela.
Hey, Mr. Masango and your guest.
Yeah, good evening to you, Matqubela.
Good evening.
Yes, sir.
Yes, and greetings to you down under there.
Yes, sir. Go ahead, Matqubela.
Yes, I like the topic and I like the discussion. I want to take you slightly backwards, talking about not all life is spiritual, or is it all life, or are material things spiritual or not? I think they are. Today we talk about artificial intelligence. It's not new. Been there for many, many years ago. Again, when you the man called Christ, he was said that he calmed the storm. Isn't that artificial intelligence?
What?
And the patriarch Moses.
Sorry. Help me. How is calming the storm artificial intelligence?
Because the storm can hear you, can hear me.
Okay.
The storm is able to perceive and listen to us.
Yeah.
Be it a rainstorm, my grandfather taught me when there's a dangerous storm, can talk to it.
Yeah.
Can circumvent it and make it go instead of coming to harm and destroy.
Right.
That's one. We grew up being able to go and to the mountain and pray for the rain. And we used to do that and carry umbrellas because we knew certainly it will rain after that. But if you look at the patriarch Moses, when he went back to the great kingdom of Egypt, he was carrying a stick. He was asked, "What do you have?" He said, "Only a stick." It turned into a snake. And there are many others, such marvels, that we look at them as marvels, but we are highly spiritual people, and indeed we are eternal. But sometimes we forget because we live in a physical world. And the things that are around us are indeed also spiritual. Today we give them new names and we call them artificial intelligence. They've been here with us for many, many. As old as the earth is, 4.9 billion years ago, as it is said by science. So your guests, be it in New Zealand or Australia, no crime, nothing, but there are challenges of life. So you do need that purpose. That is my take for tonight.
Makobela, as always, thank you very much for that important contribution. Albert is in Pretoria. Good evening to you, Albert.
Hello, Aubrey, and hello to your guest. You are discussing a very interesting topic. The gentleman has been talking about anxiety and why are we anxious. And I take it from the point of view where I ask myself, who am I? The first thing would be I would normally think of my conceptual I, the things that I identify with, which will be my possessions. But more than that, it would be my thoughts. And these thoughts, when they happen, from time to time, we have emotions. And in this case, we're talking about anxiety, which is an emotion. But truly, who am I? I happen to be a spirit, a soul. I am connected to other things. And when I am in that dimension of spirituality, when I realize who the true essence that I am, suddenly I can be able to withstand the things that are happening because I no longer have a reaction to that anxiety because I am in my spiritual being. It does not mean that in real life the conceptual I does not want to have possessions, things, material things that sustain my body, my day-to-day thing. But I can suddenly endure, not react, and in that mode, suddenly there is acceptance, there is no reaction, and things might be bad, but there is peace within. That essence, just like if I were to ask you, what is the essence of a room? Is it the wall, the furniture in it, or the space? And when I connect with that space, suddenly there's consciousness. Suddenly there is presence. And with that presence comes the spirituality. And that's what we are losing now when we are chasing for things. And we become anxious. And that anxiety gap, we start trying to live in the future. What if? What if? And it's no longer peace.
Albert, thank you very much, my brother. I appreciate your call. Much appreciated. As we close, Buddha, what do we do with this anxiety epidemic? What is your prescription for this conversation?
That we should make this conversation louder and louder. It should be a conversation that becomes part of the education of our young, that we are spiritual beings. We are embodied in this material mind, intellect, and body. But then our real welfare lies in understanding our intrinsic nature as spiritual beings, so we can be able to separate what is happening on the temporary platform and what is actually who we are and what can affect us. So to encourage more and more education of the spiritual reality of man, in that way, creating resilience to people and in this environments that are creating stress and anxiety.
Are you coming back home? Eh?
When am I coming?
I can't lose you to these places.
Yeah, I'm coming back early. I'm coming back in January. But these days, Ochela bantu ukuthi ekhaya for some time. Bakubonisa umhlolo.
Savya the monk. Savya Sachi does Prabhu. I call him Spuda the monk. It's been great talking to you. How do people get in touch with you and have more deep conversations with you?
We can connect on Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook as Savya the Monk. Savya the Monk. Savya the Monk.